Welcome to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Greger on dailyfaceoff.com. Delivered by DoorDash.
Welcome to episode 68, the Jaromir Jagr episode of the DFO Rundown. And Double J is still playing. It's unbelievable. We got to get him on the show soon. It's amazing. 49 years young and he's still playing. I'm Jason Greger alongside Frank Saravalli. The DFO Rundown is brought to you by Fantrax. Go to fantrax.com/DFO Rundown. That's where you can register to enter to win a signed Nathan MacKinnon jersey. Okay, it's a customizable fantasy platform. If you're doing season long for keeper leagues, you're doing a dynasty league, a redraft league, they can do it all at fantrax.com. Frank, how you doing, my man?
I'm good. Yeah, Jaromir Jagr, old friend. I would love to go over to the Czech Republic and see him when he turns 50 in February, when he's still on the ice playing. Like, it's an unbelievable story.
Well, we had Rob Rossi on the pod last week, and Pittsburgh's like, we can't even retire his jersey because he's still playing. But I'm like, well, you probably could if you really want to, but he's still playing, so you can't even give him over to be part of the ceremony. I think that's the bigger issue.
I say this like this is not tongue in cheek at all. He has more pressure on him than any other hockey player on the planet. Owning the team, his dad works for the team. He's trying to keep the team in the top Czech league, and he's the only draw. He's the draw for sponsors, for tickets, for everything else. He's got to keep playing because he needs to, keep the franchise afloat money-wise. It's hard to make money in that league.
Yeah. Oh, very difficult. Too bad they can't get get the young next Jaromir Jagr, although it probably will never be another Jaromir Jagr. He was that good. Now, speaking of Jaromir Jagr, he was the 5th overall pick, 1990. Pretty good draft class that year. Obviously, he turned out to be the best pick from that class. But there's no guarantees, Frank. But here we are. The regular season begins next week, and from my event, there's a few teams that look to be, at least in management, trying to set themselves up. We can talk at the tank job. Arizona, Buffalo specific. Now, Buffalo maybe because of the Jack Eichel thing's a little bit different. But what do you make of Tank 22?
It's a race to the bottom. Like, that's really what it is. I mean, let's be honest. It's a race for Shane Wright. Who can get there? I look no further than the goaltending for these two teams. In Buffalo, both teams are spending like literally the bare minimum, $1.5 million, the lowest you can spend on goaltending as per the CBA. Buffalo's trotting out 40-year-old Craig Anderson, who had actually made the decision and I think had announced his retirement, if I'm not mistaken, or at least the Washington Capitals did it for him before his career was revived by a last-minute offer from the Sabres, who, after seeing Linus Ullmark go, didn't have anyone else in net. They also bring in Aaron Dell, and then you look at the Coyotes, and honestly, like, I think it's possible that the Coyotes' goaltending is better. They take Carter Hutton from Buffalo. He's on a minimum deal, and Josef Koronash from the San Jose Sharks in a trade. Again, I think the Coyotes are a bit better on paper, at least. Their back end has a chance to be a little bit more difficult to play against. Jacob Chychrun coming off an 18-goal season in which he got a Norris Trophy vote from me. They added Shane Gostisbehere, who I'm really curious about him because I actually think he has something left in the tank that he can revive his career. He had a crisis of confidence in Philly and needed to get out of there in the worst way. And some of their players up front are still pretty decent. Clayton Keller can be a good player. Phil Kessel is probably going to want to have a big season, knowing that he could be traded and generate some interest. And just, Lawson Krause, just some players that might be able to make it interesting. In Buffalo, though, my God, that's unbelievable what that roster looks like at this moment.
So the fun question will be not so much who finishes 30th, but ultimately it comes down to the lottery. That's these two could easily finish 32nd and 31st and still not win the draft lottery.
I'd be shocked if they don't finish 32nd and 31st.
Oh no, I would agree.
Maybe that's when Detroit swoops in finally after being there, right there, and probably should have won a lottery. And this is the year that they go and do it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, guess what? Detroit, I guess, if they're looking for better odds, unfortunately for them, they got it with the Jacob Vrana shoulder injury. So he's out 4 months, is one of their top line players. But Detroit's got way better players overall.
But they're going to be in that 29-30 range. They could easily have enough ping pong balls to win the lottery.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. But I've always believed you can't ask players to tank. The players are there. They're playing for their career, their future career. They got pride. They're going to try hard. So in this case, it's like both management crews decided, you know what? We're not going to ask anybody not to play up to their potential. We're just going to add more players whose potential is lower.
Yeah. And look, this story to me is one of the key storylines to watch for the season. I'm actually excited. Our guest today, Scott Burnside, he's got a piece coming out this week on dailyfaceoff.com about the storylines to watch. I'd be surprised if this isn't one of them.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely going to be one. We're going to welcome Scotty into the woodjerseys.com studio momentarily. Of course, go to Wood Jersey. You see the Boston Bruins one right behind me. Frank's got his Toronto one. We are going to get some new ones for the start of the regular season. They've got lots more teams, so check it out at woodjerseys.com. Now, Frank, I'm impressed to have our guest on today, Scott, because we're going to talk a lot of hockey, but I'm just going to tease it right now for audience. In rapid fire, there's going to be a question to Scott that I'm not sure many people have they're like, what? He did what? Like, Scott Burnside had a very unique career that he was doing right before he transitioned to the NHL. Now, I understood why he wanted to make a change, but it's fascinating. So that's going to come up in a rapid fire in a second. But let's get to our big guest today, brought to you by ESPN Plus. And they become a must-have for hockey fans. You can get access to more than 1,000 out-of-market NHL games and 75 weekly national games all season. Plus, stream thousands of live events from the best leagues and the biggest tournaments in the world. Exclusive originals, the complete 30 for 30 library, love that show, premium articles and fantasy tools, and more with ESPN Plus. You can go now and sign up at espnplus.com/NHL/DFO.
And if you live in the US, NHL TV is no more. ESPN Plus is the replacement. So if that's what you use to stream games from around the league, ESPN Plus is going to be how you're doing it this season and moving forward. Our next guest is actually not a guest at all. He's one of the newest members of the dailyfaceoff.com team. He's been covering the NHL since 1997 when he started in Windsor covering the Detroit Red Wings. And he's now become one of the most prolific hockey journalists out there. You know him, Scott Burnside. Welcome to the DFO Rundown.
Brian, thanks for having me. I feel a little bit bad, though, because I'm like someone you have to invite, right? Like, it's not like, okay, who can we get? Oh, my God, he has to come on. And
see,
it's like,
that's not true. Like, if you weren't any good, I just wouldn't have given you the rundown invite. We could have just said, Scott, you know what? Go off and launch your own podcast. We don't want any of that here.
Okay, well, I feel a little bit better now, but it's tremendous, as always, to chat with you and Jason. So thanks for having me aboard.
Yeah, so actually, that was a nice little segue. You are launching a pod. It is this week. Give us the name of it. Tell us who you're doing it with and give us some details.
I wish I could take credit for the name, which is an outstanding one. The Suitcase and the Scribe, and my good pal Mike McKenna and I are going to once a week join forces with the rest of the Daily Faceoff media world, and we're going to talk some hockey, and Mike is incredibly smart. I've had a number of NHL executives reach out to me and remind me that Mike's a St. Lawrence guy, so he's really smart, basically warning me that I'm probably in over my head. But I'm looking forward to it. I met Mike the year I spent with the Dallas Stars, and Mike was in the Stars organization, and late in the season, Mike got called up. He came on, and we'll probably talk about it again this week. So, but he got called in relief of Kari Lettinen, who got hurt in San Jose. Mike came on, played great. Stars got a win. And I think it was his first NHL game in 2 or 3 years. And then at the Athletic, and Mike played for another 10 or NHL organizations before he retired. But he and I have become quite close and stayed in touch after he retired, and talked a lot about the business of reporting on hockey, which he did for a couple of years as a color guy in Vegas. So really looking forward to it. And it's such a smart, insightful guy. And We're going to have some fun, guaranteed.
So Scott, let's get into the some stories of the weekend. Robin Lehner comes out and didn't pull any punches. Called out a few people, the NHL, and basically said, if I don't hear from the NHL, I will start airing these stories one day at a time. And the NHL, I guess, note to everybody else, if you want to get a response from the NHL, that's the way to do it, because now he has a meeting with them. What do you make of the accusations from Lehner?
Well, I expected they're all more or less true. I mean, I'm sure that the people on the other end, and whether it's, any NHL team doctors or trainers, whatever, they may have a rationalization for it. But, again, I think what Robin was talking about is something that, I think people have been discussing more or less quietly for years. And there are issues, and have been for a long time, about pain medication and the sleep aids. I remember talking, and this is a long, probably 7 or 8 years ago, talking to an NHL GM who said he felt that the whole Ambien sleep aid issue might have been the biggest single problem that no one was talking about at the NHL level. And I know the NHLPA has, they're certainly aware of it. But to me, these are the kinds of things that when someone like Robin Lehner, who has had, an incredible career, an incredible journey, very candid about his own issues and the elements that, the demons, for want of a better term, that he's confronted along the way. I think his words carry a lot of weight, because he's a guy who deals in honesty. And I have no doubt that what he says, he believes entirely. So, and I think it was important for the NHL to respond quickly and say, listen, we would love to spend some time talking with Robin, break these things down. I mean, it's a lot of skepticism about the NHL out there. A lot of it, you go back to how the NHL has responded to the investigation into the Chicago Blackhawks, and the fact that they had staffer who would allegedly sexually assault a member of the team and then go on to be convicted of sexual assault after leaving the Blackhawks team. There's a lot of skepticism about the league's role in that and their transparency. And so I think there's a lot of skepticism that this is a meeting to make Robin Lehner shut up. And if that's what it is, then shame on the NHL. But here's hoping that this creates some sort of dialogue that it's okay to talk about it. Hey, we don't know what to do with this, or we shouldn't have done that, or, this isn't good for players. And I don't know, maybe I'm Pollyannish, but I think it's a step in the right direction. But man, there's a lot of steps to go, and a lot of cynicism out there about what this actually means.
I wanted to chime in for a second, because I had a chance to actually exchange messages with Robin Lehner yesterday. And it's interesting to get a little more clarity from his end in terms of what are you looking to do here? And I'm going to write something later today that'll appear on Daily Faceoff, just about, he's not trying to come in. His viewpoint is he's not trying to come in and burn it down. Like, he doesn't want to have to send this string of bombs, that people have to see publicly. He actually wants to affect change from within. And so that's his end game. Now, he does have a meeting upcoming with the NHL, but importantly, he had a meeting with the NHLPA on Sunday where they sat down and they worked through some of the lists of things and issues and concerns and questions that he has. So I think, also getting the support from the PA side is pretty significant as well.
Oh, yeah.
So that's sort of his game plan moving forward. And he wanted to clarify one thing, and I'll mention it here, but I'll also mention it in the story. He also lobbed an accusation out there to the Flyers and Alain Vigneault. And if you saw it, Chuck Fletcher, their GM, responded with a statement on Sunday saying that they don't believe that any of their players have received any sort of improper medical advice or treatment or anything like that. And that wasn't what Robin Lehner meant or wanted to say. So he wanted it out there that his criticism of Alain Vigneault is related to how Alain Vigneault has treated, in Robin Lehner's words, other players with mental health issues. So he wanted to make that clear that in case there was any ambiguity about what exactly he meant to say in that tweet, he was never alleging that Alain Vigneault was handing out pills to players or anything like that. It was a totally separate issue. And I think in that string of tweets that he had sent, that, it was sort of one subject and then another subject, and it wasn't necessarily clear as to exactly what he was getting at. But that's certainly, he wanted that point out there. And so I guess my thing is, one, there's so much power in what he's saying, because a lot of players have tried to tackle these issues, but a lot of times, unfortunately, they've waited until their post-playing career because they didn't want it to impact their career as it was ongoing. And so I don't think we've really seen, and Scott, you have a longer track record, and Jason, than I do covering the league. I can't remember an active current player, using his pulpit, if you will, as a current player to make these kinds of statements and allegations. And there's a lot of power in that. And I think it's easy for fans, it's easy for the league, and probably even easy for the Golden Knights and the PA at a certain point to say, for lack of a better term, this guy's off his rocker, or whatever you want to say, because he has been so open about his mental health journey that in some ways it's made it easy for people to push Robin Lehner aside. And I want to remind everyone of one really important thing. It's actually two. They go hand in hand. One is that when Robin Lehner spoke up last year and the players were under some pretty significant restrictions, he said, they told us to get vaccinated, and that if we all did, that the restrictions would loosen. And right away, everyone, the team, the league, and the PA all came out that same day and said, we never made any promises like that. That's false. And I can remember the stories, and I think I wrote one as well. And everyone was quick to condemn Robin Lehner for what he said. But the truth is, 2 weeks later, the restrictions were loosened for teams that were vaccinated. Yeah. And I think it's important to point that out, that, he was correct. And the second part that goes hand in hand with that is one of the tweets that he sent sort of later in the day on Saturday saying, I've made a lot of mistakes in my career, 12 years, but lying isn't one of them. So, I think, Scott, you said it perfectly in the beginning, which was, he truly believes exactly what he's saying. And I think, there's a lot of power in that truth if you're willing to express and come out and be the person, to put your name to it and say it.
Well, guys, I can tell you, because I've been covering the league for over 20 years and met a lot of different players and had some relationships that are, where there's trust involved. I had 3 text conversations over the weekend, and one turned into a phone call, and all 3 of the guys said, what now they, when I asked them about Vigneault, because at that point, that's what the public one, they're like, well, I've never heard that. But they did say they know they were willing to, they didn't want to name names or the team they played on at the time, that said, I never heard a team push it on a player, but I've heard guys ask for it and they always got what they asked for. Yeah. That was the direct quote, basically, from 2 different guys. They always got what they asked for. So I don't believe that Robin Lehner, anything he's saying is untrue as far as, this is an issue. And Scott, I think, you and I and Frank's probably talked to guys like sleeping pills and pain pills. Like, there's been lots of other players that have talked about it, Frank, as you said, post-career, right? Where they've talked about, it's kind of hooked on painkillers and such. And, they didn't have people kind of helping you because they probably didn't have the right people to have that knowledge. So I think Robin Lehner here, to come out and say this, it might be uncomfortable for people. And I think we have to learn to have conversations rather than just want to attack and say, let's get this person fired and let's get this person fired. That doesn't teach anyone anything. It's like, now, if somebody's proven that they did it repeatedly, okay, well, then that person could be removed. But if there was one guy on one team did it and then another guy on another team, you have to have conversations and some guidelines put in place to say, hey, this has to stop. How can we stop it now? Because Lehner, Frank, was a really good point how you said the league and everybody said no, and then 2 weeks later, everything changed as far as the teams that were unvaccinated, this would be a similar thing. And I'll tell you right now that some teams will be having internal conversations, guaranteed. I spoke to one management person and said, we're going to have to, do a deep dive within our organization, because sometimes, Frank, people at the top don't know every little detail. If all of a sudden one defenseman, has a real pain issue problem and he's asking, a doctor, and I'm just making up this scenario, I'm not saying that's true, that doesn't necessarily mean that guy's going to go tell the GM or the assistant GM or even the coach what's happening behind the scenes in every case.
Yeah. No, and Frank, I think you raised an excellent point on this, on the notion that somebody who's, not just in the game. I mean, Robin Lehner is a huge part of one of the best teams in the NHL. And for him to have that, I think we toss around terms like courage way too often, but I do think it's courageous for somebody who, it's easier not to say stuff, right? Like it's just easier not to do any of what Robin Lehner did. So good for him. And I think it will be interesting to see, and you alluded to it, Jason, what's the conversation like in 31 other dressing rooms or management offices or coaching offices today and tomorrow and moving forward? And what does that conversation look like when Robin Lehner, talks to, whether it's Bill Daly, or maybe he talks to Bill Daly and the medical team at the NHL, who were so important in terms of the, working with the doctors from the PA to put protocols in place to allow for games to take place the last 2 seasons. Maybe that's what happens. And I think the fact that it is someone who is actively in the game in this moment to have these conversations, I think it puts a real sharp point on it, and it's what's needed.
But here's going to be the real question, guys, and Scott alluded to it, right now on the outside, there's going to be a lot of people that question the validity of any investigation the NHL does based on their past track record. When they have to do an internal investigation on things, usually they always either do it half-heartedly and they don't do it in depth enough to really ever come down and inflict sort of change. So that would be my question. Is this going to be the tipping point where all of a sudden they say, okay, you know what? Because the NHL historically has always been, don't talk about anything, right? They never wanted players to barely show their personalities. But we're seeing subtle little changes, guys. Like even as something as small as reducing the willingness to have to wear a suit every game, right? The Arizona Coyotes have done it. Now some other teams. And I just wonder, are we seeing small little changes in the try to portray the perfect image on the outside that the NHL has tried to have for many, many decades?
Yeah.
Well, I think the easiest way to explain it is this sort of divide that exists between hockey culture and the game itself. And it's interesting, like, I think anyone that butts up against or questions or challenges the cultural norm in this sport is ostracized right away. And it takes us a long time for people to figure out or realize that person was probably right. The person that challenged or stepped up. And whether it's been a lot of other things that have been super slow to change or not. I feel like it's come a long way, but also is still sort of stuck in its own neutral state at times. Like, as much as there has been some progress on, combating racism and combating all these other things, making the game more inclusive, well, then there's still this, how come the investigation on Bill Peters hasn't wrapped up yet?
Yep.
Like that's been almost 2 calendar years. It's been 23 months. And in the meantime, the NHL has wrapped up all sorts of other investigations. They've done one on Evander Kane. They've done one on John Chaika, the Coyotes GM. Like there's been numerous problems or issues that have popped up that they've worked through, even if the investigation has taken a long time. Yet something as simple as dealing with Bill Peters and the allegations that Akeem Aliu made, and yet we have no answer and no one's questioned or sort of brought it up. So I guess I say all that to say that there's still a lot of room to grow.
Well, but I mean, let's say, does it not come from the top? And is it not the things that get done are directed by leadership, and we know the strength of Gary Bettman and Bill Daly in the power dynamic within hockey. And when the people at the very top want things done, they get done. And I go back to the Chicago Blackhawks investigation, and really, I just think the NHL, really missed an opportunity to sort of take the narrative of different way and to show a different, whether it's not the side, but to say, we're going to confront this head on. We're not going to look like we're trying to sweep it under the rugs. We're not going to look kind of passive about it, but that's exactly what they've done. Right? There's no real sense, I don't think, that at the end of the day, we'll know exactly what happened, and that there will be a day of reckoning for anyone for whom there should be a day of reckoning in that organization. I think I think there is a lot of skepticism that we'll ever get to that point. And to your point there, Frank, why is it taking so long on Bill Peters? Well, it's a really uncomfortable topic, and it involves one of the most powerful organizations in the NHL. Well, how can you not be cynical about it when you see those things happening? And I think it's disappointing it should be disappointing to a lot of people, both outside the game and on teams, and the owners and management teams around the NHL should be disappointed by it too. And it would be nice if we just saw people at the very top seize these kinds of moments and really be willing to shine a light on things that are uncomfortable. But Frank, you talk about it. That's not hockey. That's not how hockey has ever been. And I don't see that we're that close to it now.
Well, we could make the argument it's really how society is. Hockey's kind of a product of society. If you look at the most uncomfortable situations in our society right now, it's glacier slow in how a lot of the movement for change on something, we're talking decades for things to change. And so hopefully, this will maybe expedite a little bit for the NHL. This would seem like one that you could at least go head on and say, okay, we have to readjust how we look at it, and how we have to have a better communication and better protocol perchance on how players can get access to sleeping pills and different things like that. And so it leads me to this question for you, Scott. Robin Lehner also has been pretty vocal about, let Jack Eichel get his surgery. What are we waiting for? This is the player's body, and we should have a choice on that. And Frank's alluded to this in the past. He's like, why not just allow him to get the surgery that he wants? What am I missing here? Why hasn't that happened?
Well, I mean, I get that whole point, but I say, that's, to me, the Eichel thing is one of the most complicated issues that we've seen, especially relating to a star player in a long time. And I'm not a doctor. I don't even play one on TV. So is disc replacement better than disc fusion? I understand both. And I understand, when talking to executives around the NHL who have watched this unfold, may have had some interest in acquiring Jack Eichel, there isn't a cut and dried, yes, if you have the disc replacement, which is what Jack Eichel would like, this is a guarantee, or there are certainties about what will happen in terms of rehabilitation and when he might be back on the ice and ability to play at 100%. Buffalo Sabres and their doctors have taken a different view. And Jack Eichel signed a contract, as all players have signed a contract. It's in the CBA. So if Jack Eichel decides he wants to do B, not A, then he runs the risk of having his contract voided, because the contract is very clear. If you go outside what the team wants, then you are defying the contract that he willingly signed. Now, you can argue, should he have the right to choose what he does with his body? In some ways you forfeit that right. I mean, if you have an employer that has a certain, not to go COVID on it, but I know just in Delta, if you want to, if you don't get vaccinated, you're going to pay an extra $200 a month in health benefits. So, okay, you can make that choice, but the choices come with consequences. I guess that's my point. And Jack Eichel is in that position. He wants to do something that the team does not want him to do, but he signed a contract. So I have some sympathy for Jack Eichel in this. It's a mess, but I don't think you can just say, well, let Jack Eichel do whatever he wants, because he's $50 million worth of asset to the Buffalo Sabres. And, they have a say in this. And if you don't like it, then you better be ready to walk away from $50 million, which I'm pretty sure he's not. So.
Yeah, this was a tough one for me. I get all the points that you're making. I think I guess what part of my issue is with the argument is that I feel like there just hasn't been enough, at least this is totally from a public perspective, there hasn't been enough support from the PA, in that my understanding here is that, and I, again, this is subject to further reporting and getting it all out there, but my understanding is that the PA's doctors have reviewed the file, and they're also siding with the choice that the Sabres want to make. And so they're not even able to, if Jack Eichel wanted to, he could file a grievance, but he's not even getting the support from his own union to this point to allow the ball to sort of matriculate down the field, if that makes any sense. Like, there's no ability to make any progress, given that it's almost a non-starter from the beginning.
Yeah, but really, doesn't this come back to a fact that you've got, a number 2 overall draft pick, your team's captain, or was until they took the C away from him a few weeks ago when he failed his physical. But this comes down to a fundamental breakdown in the relationship, right? Like, I can't imagine that if Connor McDavid is in the same position in Edmonton, or Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh, or, go down the list, that there isn't a way that all the parties, agent, player, family, doctors, owners, whoever needs to be in that room, that they don't sit down and say, how can we make this work? What's the best case scenario? All the pros and cons, and walk out the door and have a resolution. Well, the things are so broken in Buffalo, and have been for a long time. And they're broken with Jack Eichel. He's changed agents in the midst of all this. To me, that's what this is. This is about, 2 different medical approaches to getting him back on the ice and letting him not just be an elite player, but also have a healthy, long life without having repeated surgeries down the road. I get all that. But to me, one of the reasons you can't do that, or they can't find that common ground, is that things are fundamentally broken. So,
and I think my question is, who's going to blink? Like, and how does this get resolved? Like, how, I don't know what the answer is. And just making some calls about it this weekend, I'm wondering if one of the solutions is to basically carve out some kind of exemption, some kind of one-off, one-time, Jack, you can have this surgery, but if you're not cleared on the flip side of it, then your contract's voided, and that's it. Like, we're absolving ourselves from any further obligation to pay you, because this is what you want. This is what you want to do. It's essentially a waiver. You sign a waiver that if this surgery doesn't work and you can't compete at an NHL level following this surgery, well, then that's on you. I don't even know the legality of it. I can't imagine the league or any other team would like to see some kind of precedent like that set, specifically when, as Scott, you mentioned, it's so clearly spelled out in the CBA as to how exactly this should work.
Well, I don't know. I think it's a great question, because I know there was a lot of criticism of Jack Eichel's, earlier representation. They came out with a release, I think it was late on a Friday. It wasn't great, but I think at one point, had Jack Eichel been given permission to do the replacement, that there was a relatively short period of rehabilitation. Like, there was a potential for Jack Eichel to get moved, go to a new team, have this procedure, and actually play at some point this year. It's so hard to imagine how any of this, all of it, anything could happen that at some point sees Jack Eichel on the ice this season. Like, I don't know how it happens, because, you throw in the whole issue of the Sabres wanting it all, right? They stick to their guns on the medical side. Kevin Adams has asked for the moon, which is fair, but no one's going to pay the moon for a player who is in such limbo. It makes no sense. And I know you guys have both probably talked to people who have sort of dipped their toes in this, and it's like, well, maybe we're interested if the Sabres eat some salary, or if they roll back on what they're asking for, which is basically a potload of first-round picks or first-round type players. It's a king's ransom that they're asking for. Again, totally within their right. But who's making that deal? What GM can go to an owner and say, don't know if he's going to play again, don't know what his next
$50 million.
And he's $50 million. And by the way, we're giving up, our top 4 or 5 prospects and or picks over the next 2 or 3 years. Who makes that move? No one does. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
It's sad.
The ask is a little unrealistic, but then you throw in the uncertainty of the future health of Jack Eichel, that at this point, I don't even know if Eichel's camp knows. Like, both camps seem confident that the surgery that they want is the best route.
Correct.
And the scary part about any surgery is, I don't care what surgery you do, there's always a risk that something bad can happen. We've seen it to other athletes, and something is weird. Stephen Marsh was a football player. He had surgery on his knee that just I say basic, but a routine ACL surgery. Well, it turned out he had a reaction to it, had massive scar tissue, never played again, right? So these things, no one would expect that to happen. So there's always a risk of any surgery. That's why I kind of chuckle when I hear minor surgery. I'm like, anytime you're going in on an athlete, there's that small chance, very minute, that something goes wrong. And Frank, your idea actually does make a lot of sense, because it does put the onus, if Eichel's camp and their doctor are so adamant that this is going to be the best case, well, then maybe they got to do something, because that does go a little bit against, well, not a little bit, completely against what the current CBA is. And I wonder if that conversation has been gone on, because people that I've talked to, now granted, they're not in Buffalo, they're on the other side. And Scott, you alluded to it, that they haven't seen any progress. Like, this has just been a stalemate. Both sides have dug in, and it's been like, what is this now? 6 months, guys? 6 months?
Since March.
And there's been zero sway, which makes me, this almost seems like it's gotten past the point of just a medical procedure. Now it's personal. And it's like the Sabres versus Eichel's camp, and it's gotten very personal. And I don't know if the NHL or a mediator or someone can come in, because at this point, I don't see who's going to blink.
For the longest time, I kept saying, you know what? I think Jack Eichel will come back and play for the Sabres again. Yeah, that's not happening. So
no.
I wanted to, and Scott, we really appreciate your time. We'll let you go. I just wanted to put a big bow on our discussion. I'm actually hopeful about where the NHL and the NHLPA are going after this weekend. And here's why. Yes, Robin Lehner quieted down on Sunday after both the league and the PA reached out. But you cannot put a muzzle on Robin Lehner. I'm totally convinced of that. Yep. And if they want to move at a glacial speed, as Jason suggested, or if change is not coming or not fast enough, he'll just lob another bomb. He didn't say that. That's what I gleaned from the situation, which was, this guy is not going to be kept down. And so that's why I'm hopeful, is that he's going to hold feet to the fire here to actually affect change. And so, again, we'll see whether it happens or not, but what an interesting weekend without really any actual hockey talk. It was all off the ice.
So you're Robin Lehner, early Hart Trophy candidate then. You penciled him in early? Here's the amazing part about that, is that if he actually does affect change and makes players' lives better, I think it's a bigger accomplishment than anything that could happen on the ice. I couldn't agree more.
That is totally true. Scotty, well, before we end, we always like to play Rapid Fire. It's brought to you by DoorDash, a proud sponsor of the Nation network of podcasts, restaurants, and more, delivered right to your door. It's convenient, it's easy, and for first-time users, you can get 25% off when you use, and no delivery fees when you use the promo code RUNDOWNDD. So the only rule, Scotty, is you have to answer the questions. Okay?
Is that a question? Yes.
Yes, there you go, Scott. You're playing well. I like it. You're a good listener. Good listener. After writing on deadline or whatever, what is Scott Burnside's cocktail of choice?
Ooh, I've evolved more red wine, and if it's really warm, a little rosé. But yeah, I'm more. I've evolved into a red wine, but a good PBR is still welcome.
Okay, now I'm guessing many of our viewers and listeners might not have known this, but Scott Burnside, prior to becoming an NHL writer, wrote a story, a book, Deadly Innocence, the Paul Bernardo story. How many years did you have to work on that book?
I worked on that story. I was at the Toronto Sun from 92 to 97, basically, and the trial was in the fall of 95. And wrote a book with my colleague Alan Cairns, who passed away a year and a half ago. But yes, worked on it. That does seem like another lifetime ago, and I would shill for it, but it's in some remainder bin, I'm sure.
How do you transfer from serial killer writer to NHL writer?
Now, if you were a cynic, you would say it's not that big a jump, but no. Honestly, it was the perfect tonic after a long time of. It was a hard story to cover, and I couldn't have been happier to learn a new job, a new skill as a hockey guy. And some would say it's still taking a long time, but no, it was. I've never, not once, have regretted making that move, even as I learned a ton as a news guy for a long time, doing hard things. It was, I don't regret any of it.
So I'll be honest, I kind of have a little bit of, I read a lot of books and I watch a lot of documentaries on serial killers. It just, I can't relate to it, but it really grabs my attention. So my question to you is, now you covered it in depthly. Do you watch a lot of documentaries on serial killers, books on serial killers because of that?
Yeah, I'm a fiction snob, so I don't read anything that's nonfiction. Sorry. But we watch a lot of Dateline, a lot of that stuff. And, I'd sit down and watch Zodiac over and over again, loved Mindhunters. And I love all that kind of stuff. And I don't necessarily relate it to my experiences covering Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, and that seems separate to me. But I'm fascinated, like a lot of people, by procedural stuff like that.
Okay. As you've covered the NHL now, coming on close to 25 years, what is the best city for a media guy on the road?
Oh, I
know what he's going to say.
I hate to be predictable now, and I will only say that part of this is, where do media people like to go and hang out with each other? And I spent a lot of time in Pittsburgh over the years, and know a couple of spots that are very welcoming and friendly for local writers, and nice and close to the rink. So I like it. And I will say this about Pittsburgh, that it's an incredible sports town, incredible hockey town. There's all kinds of incredible architecture and the bridges and lots of good restaurants. I would say Pittsburgh. Is that what you thought I was going to say, Frank?
Exactly right. I for the longest time, I thought that we were going to get like a bungee cord or something that would rope us right from the arena right into this one little spot. I don't know if we can say it by name, right next to the rink. And I can't tell you how many nights I've spent in there with Scott Burnside. It feels like a million.
Scott,
I was just going to say, it's not rapid fire now because I've gone down the rabbit hole, but when they were building the new PPG Paints arena, there was often a lot of, sort of emails with the PR staff and President David Morehouse, who actually grew up in Pittsburgh, about whether there would be an actual slide from the new arena into Shales Cafe. It never got built, but still it's an easy downhill walk from the media door.
Well, that's the thing. And we had been going there for so long, and there were so many playoff series in that building.
Yep.
That we actually, if you could you could figure out which elevator you needed to get on to get out the door that spit you right out at the bar. And it was like,
Yep.
that was it.
Scott, who is the best karaoke amongst the media people that you have partied with over your 25 years?
Well, I don't. There are a number of surprising karaoke people, but no one beats Pierre LeBrun. He's the champion. He's in a.
He only has one song though. He doesn't have a long.
It doesn't.
It's "Come On, Feel the Noise" every time.
Yeah, those are some Bon Jovi mixes in, and we both covered the Olympics in Sochi in 2014, and they had these prefab huts that they set up in various locations around the media villages, and outside of our media apartment there was a karaoke hut, and you had to pay. But you could have any song you wanted in the world, but you had to pay. And oh my goodness, there's a lot of karaoke sung in there by a lot of different people. But I do remember sweaty Pierre LeBrun belting it out at various points during the Sochi games, and that's a memory I'll take with me forever.
So conversely, who is the worst karaoke singer?
I was actually attended a Hall of Fame weekend at a bar we used to go to in Toronto all the time called Up Front. Back in the day, was owned by Dan Aykroyd, and then it was owned by Vic. That's who we owned when I was there. But Eric the Hatchuk and Al Strachan one night sang karaoke there, and I think of a bunch of cats in a burlap sack. That's what I think of when I think of Eric the Hatchuk and Al Strachan.
Up Front, it's like just even hearing that name, I smile. Like I only got to go there once or twice before it closed down, and man, that was like, as a young hockey writer coming up, going to Toronto and getting the invite to Up Front was like, that was the coolest thing ever. So,
and because this is the Never Ending podcast, my first experience at Up Front, I was working at the National Post, was covering the Leafs, and it was the night of the 5 overtime Pittsburgh Philly game, won by, I want to say Keith Primo. Keith Primo. Who's in goal? I want to say Ken. It wasn't Ken Regan. Yeah, it might have been Ken Regan. Anyway, I wandered into Up Front. I was living downtown in Toronto. Game's on. It goes on and on. It gets to last call, and Vic just puts the blinds down. He said, I'm going to lock the door. Are you okay? And I'm like, I'm happy to stay, and stayed right till, the end of the 5th overtime. And that was how we started. And that became it became a writer's bar for many, many years.
Awesome. Well, Scotty, thanks so much for joining us on the Rundown. We wish you and Mike all the great success coming up on your new podcast, The Daily Faceoff. We look forward to The Suitcase and the Scribe.
Thanks for having me aboard, guys.
Scotty Burnside, what a beauty. Glad to have him not only on the pod, but part of Daily Faceoff as I continue to build a really good team. And Frank, it's interesting. You got Arizona and Buffalo. We started off that storyline. And then, of course, the Robin Lehner story. I'll be looking forward to your article coming out this week about him. And I love how you said it. This is a story where he is going to hold the NHL to not just talk about it, because I saw Akeem Alou over the weekend say, hey, you guys told me you were going to do an investigation. 2 years later, nothing's happened. I don't think Lehner's going to be that patient.
I no, that's not his personality, at least to this point. If I had to gamble and say, which way is this going to go, it's going to be with him holding their feet to the fire.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us once again on the DFO Rundown, the Jaromir Jagr episode, number 68, brought to you by Fantrax. It's the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry. If you got a keeper league, a redraft league, a dynasty league, do it all. Get in now before the season begins at fantrax.com/DFO Rundown. That's where you register, and you can win a signed Nathan McKinnon jersey. Frank, have a good week. We should have some cuts and stuff leading up to the next pod, as we will then be within 1 week of the start of the 2021-22 NHL season.